back, everyone. It is so great to see you. And honestly, I am so happy to see everyone coming back after a break. But I'm equally excited about the people who are outside having conversations, because at the beginning of today, I was talking about how today is all about finding those meaningful human connections that lie at the heart of building a successful startup. And I personally have had conversations with startup entrepreneurs, with young students who are interning at Bupa, with people leading incredible work in different corporations, and just people so excited to be here today and talk big ideas. So I do think that the impact of this event will be felt in the weeks and months ahead. And I'd like to take a second for you to all think about one thing that you want to take back from this event. What is one new idea that you want to take back into the workplace on Monday morning, or on Friday, or on Thursday? What is one big idea that has influenced you today that you want to maybe tell your teammates about who aren't here with us today, or tell your family about, or tell your friends about, or tell people on social media about? Because I think this ripple effect is so important. When we go out there into the universe, sharing these messages of sustainability and of corporate accountability is what's going to change things for the better. Now, it wouldn't be a Bupa event if we weren't talking about sustainability in the healthcare space. So we've got a panel up ahead that is going to be addressing exactly this issue. We now have Dr. Paula Franklin, Chief Medical Officer at Bupa, who, along with our brilliant panelists, will be talking about this issue. Dr. Matt Gopal, Ariana Gamba, Professor Hugh Montgomery, and Shivi Jervis. They will be sharing some insights from their incredible work. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so pleased to see so many of you here for this session, which naturally, as Chief Medical Officer, I would think is the most important session of the day. I was really pleased to be asked to host this. We have a fabulous panel, Hugh, Matt, Ariana, and Shivi. I'm going to introduce you properly in a minute, but particularly because as a doctor, with Bupa as a healthcare company, our business really is improving the health and well-being of our customers and the people that we serve. What we're realizing is, though, that we can no longer ignore our impact on the environment and the impact of the environment on people's health. And so I think this is going to be a really exciting conversation. Healthcare has changed dramatically certainly since I started practicing. We've made amazing strides in curing and preventing illness, but that's come at a cost. It's come at a cost to our planet. Increasingly, we're aware of the impact of the delivery of healthcare on the planet. This morning, Iñaki said to us that we are responsible for 4.4% of the global emissions. I think that's extraordinary. Many of you will have heard the quote that if healthcare was a company, a business, or a country, it would be the 5th largest emitter in the world. So this is serious now. We are going to talk about the impact of healthcare on the planet. We're also going to talk a bit about the impact of the environment on people. But most importantly, we're going to talk about the need to change and the urgency of that need, what we can do about it, how we need to collaborate and rally people to come together to really address this in an urgent manner. I've been in healthcare a while. I've seen lots of innovations. Certainly there are a lot of innovations now that will make the delivery of healthcare much more efficient. But what I've noticed in the past is that very often when new things arrive, the old things don't go. And what we end up with increased activity, increased use of resources. We need to make sure that when we bring these wonderful new efficient technologies and abilities, that we actually get rid of the old ones and we reduce the waste in the healthcare system, of which there is a lot. So I'm going to quickly get on to talk to our guests and introduce them properly. We're going to talk a bit about clinicians and about culture, the influence that clinicians can have and the importance of clinician leadership in this. how culture has to change so that we're more accepting of the ways of working and using different things. And I think it's going to be a great conversation. So, my experts.
You're in your hot seat now.
Yeah. Dr. Hugh Montgomery, he's Professor of Intensive Care Medicine at University College London, where he also directs the Centre for Human Health and Performance. He was awarded an OBE in 2022, in part for his work on climate change. Dr. Matt Gopal joined Sage Tech Medical. If you haven't seen their stand, you should visit that, that's wonderful. He joined that in July 2017, bringing with him over 20 years of experience as a practicing veterinary surgeon. He has a broad understanding of and experience in the use of volatile anesthetic agents, and we're going to hear a lot about that. It's a really important impact on the environment. Ariana Gamba, designs and directs the Healthcare Without Harm European Programme and Advocacy Strategy. Gosh, that's a mouthful, Ariana. For Healthcare Without Harm. Healthcare Without Harm is a global movement for environmentally responsible healthcare. And Shivi Jervis, who is a futurist on human-centered innovation. She wants to democratize and unlock access to new innovation to the people and businesses that stand to benefit from it most. So I think you'll agree, a really expert panel. Looking forward to the conversation. I'm going to start with you, Hugh. I mentioned that climate change has an impact on our health, and also that it's a producer of many emissions. I'd like you to talk to me a little bit now about how you see climate change and the environment impacting human health now and in the years to come. What impact is this having on us? How are you seeing changes?
Well, it's a good question, and the answer has evolved even in recent months. So if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I chaired a Lancet countdown on health and climate change, and we've been looking at this for over 20 years. I don't talk about impacts on health anymore because we're now talking about human survival. We're not talking about health impacts, we're talking about life and death. And we're not talking about life and death of future generations, we're talking about our generations, by which I mean you and me and our children now. So this is an immediate threat to the survival of everyone in this room and their children if they're under the age of 50. That's the gravity of the threat we now face directly from climate change.
When we were talking earlier, you mentioned to me a couple of examples of diseases and how the environment is actually increasing the prevalence of the diseases. Could you mention a few of those?
Well, there are, if we broaden the conversation way beyond just carbon and take a much more general view, we are organisms that interact with our environment. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, and the microbiomes of those around us. And we're destroying all of those things at an extraordinary rate. So if we look at the gut microbiomes now of a Californian, which I guess would be similar to us, compared to native indigenous populations, we have half the gut biodiversity that they do because of what we eat. Of over 4,500 potential grains that we eat, we now eat 30 worldwide. Of the food we eat, we were talking about how it's packaged in plastic, for instance. A paper in Nature just this week showing that by the time before a child is even a year old, because of microwaving plastic bottles, it's consumed over 1.5 kilograms of ultra-small, fine plastic particles, which will be distributed through its body even by then. The plasticizers that we all have that make plastic soft, we put dairy products in them. We're absorbing those plasticizers, and those are driving up the rates of ovarian, breast, endometrial, and prostate cancer. Everything we're doing is poisoning us by trying to live a healthier and healthier life, and somehow we need to change that. Finally, of course, we're destroying the ecosystem upon which we depend. We're balanced on the top of a very delicate pyramid, and we've been hacking away at its base, and when that collapses, we will fall with it too.
I think some of those statistics and some of those examples will be quite shocking to some of the people in the audience. They won't have heard about that. I'm going to come to you now, Ariana, because I'm interested also from a perspective of healthcare without harm, how you see this across the globe and how you track this across the globe, because you work in a very international program.
Yeah, I think the way we see it is that we need to make our members and also the public more aware of the impact of the healthcare sector. So I think this event today is very important in achieving this goal, but we see that the awareness is not there yet. So in some countries there is some awareness, they want to do something, and in some countries there is a lot of skepticism. And so healthcare is not under the spotlight when it comes to environmental sustainability. So it's important also for healthcare professionals to make the link between health and environment. We had this discussion because indeed there are a lot of diseases that are caused by climate change, more vector-borne disease, raising temperature, and so on. But often this link is neglected when you are, in the wards operating or delivering healthcare. And so it's very important to increase awareness about the link between health and environment. We cannot have healthy people on a sick planet.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I mentioned that there's a lot of innovation in healthcare, which there is everywhere. Extraordinary ability to do things that we've never been able to do before. I wonder, Shiv, if you could talk to us a little bit about that, how you see some of these innovations. Everyone talks about AI, right?
Yeah.
How you see that playing a role in us being able to more responsibly deliver care and reduce the environmental impact.
Sure, and you can have tremendous profit and purpose with digital innovation if we use it responsibly and if regulation keeps up. So in my lab, which is a forecasting lab focusing on sustainable innovation, we test and trial thousands, I kid you not, of digital innovations. By this I mean it could take the shape of an app, a website, a digital tool, a wearable, a sensor, or in fact tap into something we all own, which is our phone, to create more digital therapeutics. So could we have more healthy interventions through innovation, particularly helping chronic disease, which has a great environmental and operational cost. And actually, you see these tools do two things. Either they impact our personal health, the stuff that you and I think about that keeps us up at night, longevity, wanting to be healthier for longer. But that then has an indirect and positive impact on environment in terms of reducing that burden on resources and infrastructure. Then there are the ones that do it more directly. And just to give you some very quick examples, I'm seeing more now digital innovation be used to preempt medical issues before they become a problem. I mean, for instance, this is not at all immodest. I'm wearing a sensor right now. This is to do with monitoring my heart rate, as I've been having some strange palpitations recently. The fact that for 14 days, my clinician is receiving a live update, and any particular spikes that are alarming, I will get an alert about, is brilliant. It was unheard of even, I would say, a decade ago. But using these interventions reduces then the time burden, the cost burden, because it's saving me time, my clinician time. It's allowing us to take charge of our health. And then, yes, you have to think about AI. But what is AI? It's just lines of code. It isn't this mythical thing that's going to bump us out of all our jobs, even though the media headlines would have you believe that. So tools like adaptive AI that a lot of the startups here are actually using, which means it flexes and adapts to our individualized needs, because we have completely unique biology and anatomy, and even looking at things like AI assisting clinicians, so augmented intelligence, meaning the person still takes charge of it, the human is at the heart of it. This in turn saves their time to free them up to focus on the higher level decision making to truly deliver that quality healthcare. But then the AI and data science tools, which don't sound very sexy, but they do a lot. They look at all these reams of information and they're able to pick out patterns that we as humans cannot hope to find, will then point out where there are opportunities for a hospital, for a clinician, to reduce wastage, to increase the quality time spent on a patient, to even things like telemedicine. So we've got, I don't know how much time we have, but there are great examples here of preempting issues, digital therapeutics, and these aren't just buzzwords. They're tools I'm seeing people use on a day-to-day basis, because that's what we care about at the end of the day, is can I stay healthier for longer? Can I keep the people around me healthier as well? And that's such an important point, isn't it? Because the healthcare that has the lowest environmental impact is the healthcare you don't need. It's the non-intervention, it's avoiding the intervention, it's preventing illness, which is exactly what you're talking about. But
we do now, and we will always need interventions. People will get ill regardless. And so I'm going to come to you, Matt, because you're at the sharp end now of a solution that's really making a difference in terms of the environmental impact that healthcare has. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about that, and maybe even talk a little bit more in more detail about the anaesthetic gases, because that is such a big issue.
That's right. So yeah, SageTech, we've developed a technology that actually captures waste anaesthetic gases from the back of an anaesthetic machine. These gases have very high global warming potentials. They're very damaging to the environment. They're very stable, so they hang around for a long time, and it's a very wasteful process using a volatile anaesthetic. With the technology we've developed, we can now hang on to those gases, extract them once we've captured them, and then recycle them, repurify them, and bring them back for clinical use. That's the aim. So we're developing this circular economy that that everybody talks about. I think it's really important, though, when we look, without sort of going too far into SageTech side of things, it's exactly change that we need. So we need to in a way, see these innovations, and there's tons of great innovations here that are going to make a difference, and we need to sort of embrace them. And I think, leading on from what Hugh was saying, this isn't something that we need to sort of think about and sum up. Well, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. I was fairly shocked 6 months ago to be on a call with somebody, and they said, well, we got to the end of the call, and they said, well, this is really interesting, but we're just going to take some time to see whether this climate thing is actually really a thing, or we're just going to take some time to consider that. So that really is a heart sinker, because if you don't get it now, you're not going to get it. So I think events like this is fantastic, and the bravery of Bupa to be involved with us as an innovation is very welcomed, and it puts an extra spring in our step to sort of think somebody actually believes in us and wants to make a difference.
Good, that's great. I'm glad we're helping. I think there's an interesting point here. I'm going to ask you, Matt, and I'm going to come back to you, Hugh, which is, in my view, in my experience, healthcare is a sector that is slow to change. It's slow to take on. We know you can have an academic study that proves and provides evidence of something. It can be 10, 15, 20 years before it becomes normal practice. So we are slow to change. And I'd like to understand your thoughts about how we can get that change quicker in the practicing environment. So for you, Matt, in the theatres, in the hospitals, and in clinics, and in the direct clinical delivery, how do we get clinicians to accept this and move fast and make these changes?
Well, it's an interesting point, and I would look at it in a slightly different way. I'm not so sure that clinicians are the block for some of these innovations, and most of the clinicians we speak to about our particular innovation, they say this is great. Come on, let's crack on and get this done. The block, the gatekeeper for us, is when we get to procurement. And then we get to situations where somebody might say, well, okay, what do we do at the moment? And I say, well, your clinicians really want this device. They want to use it. They recognize the impact it could make on their clinical practice. So, that's all fine. Okay, what do we do at the moment? Well, at the moment, all these gases just get vented out of your hospital chimney, essentially. What do we pay for that? We don't pay anything. Okay, so you're asking me, as Mr. Procurement, to pay for something that we don't pay for at the moment. It doesn't add up, and that's one of our blocking points. It's interesting. Things are starting to change, and again, Bupa are leading the way in that, and it will be very interesting, I think, from my point of view, or from the SageTech point of view, and other innovations, to see leadership in healthcare change. So, maybe hopefully this is the start where people will start to say, actually, people are not putting pounds, shillings, and pence, showing my age, as a forefront, but they're actually saying, what impact can I make from an environmental point of view? Because that's the currency I want to work in. I want to work in CO2 equivalents. What can I save? What can I do?
And Hugh, from your point of view, so do you agree? Do you think clinicians aren't the problem? I mean, the decisions that clinicians make, impact an enormous part of the clinical pathway and what's used and what isn't used.
Yes, but I think the answer is actually the businesses. So it's the Bupas of the world that make the difference. As individuals, it's very, very difficult. Even if you had procurement for a hospital, you can't change everything because you're only one cog in the system. So businesses can change this. You are right that clinicians and healthcare systems have been very slow in the past, but that's partly for the same reasons they haven't responded to climate change. There's something now that's easy to do. There's some long-term thing that might be good or bad, but it doesn't feel immediate for now. What we need to do is take the attitude we take with emergency patients, and that is we have to do what's necessary and sufficient to save the life now. If it isn't necessary, don't do it. If it's necessary, you do. And you do as much of it as is needed to save the life and nothing less. For climate change, that means 10.2% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1 to 3, every year, including this year. So 6 months' time, Bupa and everyone in this room have to reduce their emissions of everything they do and everything they purchase by 10.2%. That's what's necessary and sufficient. We can't leverage that on our own. What we can do, though, is to work with the ecosystem. So Bupa working with other healthcare providers, the people from whom you're purchasing, to change your scope 1 and 2. That's the power you purchase and use. But to write into the contracts to say, we will not be buying from you unless you've committed to this level of decarbonisation. And if you do it together, you have such enormous purchasing power that you can change things incredibly quickly. And whilst we're saying, well, we're only 4.5% of greenhouse gas emissions, we're 11.7% of global domestic product. And if you add in healthcare products for consumers, we're over 25%. So if we change that level of spending globally in a few years, which we can, the rest of the world decarbonizes with it. So the positive part here is we can do this. But to go back to your original point, we have to do it with enormous aggression and urgency. This is not something, to quote Sally from the last session, that can be some net, which doesn't exist, a target for 30 or 25 years' time. We need immediate action right now.
Thank you. Ariana, do you think that Hugh talked about the need of the sense of urgency and the need for aggression in attacking this. Do you think that people have that now? Do you think people get that now?
Yeah, I think there is a sense of urgency. We've seen the word urgency today in one of the slides, so we've seen that. I think there is, but I think I like the idea of ecosystem because it's not clinicians, it's not procurers, it's how they work together. So we identified in our project 3 levers of change. One is the policy mandate. You need to have your senior management, your leaders, your CEO saying we need to do this because otherwise you don't have the policy mandate to change. But then you have to change the practice. And that in the healthcare, it takes a long time to change practice, studies, and so on. We always done it this way, and so change is not. And then you have to change the culture, because even if you change the standard operating procedure, you need to have your staff on board with this new procedure, and so you have to change the culture. Staff and patients, we have seen great examples, for instance, of UK hospitals reducing the use of unnecessary gloves. That's the culture, how you use them, but not only the staff, also the patients. I remember seeing vaccination campaign pictures and people commenting, why is not wearing gloves? You don't need to wear gloves to vaccinate people. And so how to change the culture and give the right information. So I think it's policy, practice, and culture.
I think it's an interesting point, and I want to move to talk about patients for a minute or two, because many of the conversations I've had, when you get to the point of the individual's care, the individual who requires care themselves or their child or their parent or whatever, they want the best care. They want immediate, high interventional care with very little thought about the environment. And so there's a sort of a friction point there, I guess. And I'm interested actually to hear from all of you, because either as a provider or as a patient or as a person involved in the healthcare system, how you think that we can manage that that relationship, the role of clinicians, the role of the use of technology, the role of education and information. I'm interested in that because that's really where the rubber hits the road, doesn't it? I want you to use all of the bells and whistles for me or for my daughter because, her health is at stake. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think it's interesting actually because we work with a group up at the Freeman Hospital in Newcastle, and one of the young anaesthetists there said to me, we were carrying out a particular study, having a chat about sustainability, and one of the anaesthetists there said, I don't think it's going to be long before patients will be given an option to have a particular type of procedure that is based around sustainability. If you start having data for patients to be able to make a decision by. So that's quite an interesting concept. So I sort of had to take that away and think about it. So, yeah, will the patient start to drive things?
Yeah. Yeah, Hugh?
Yeah, I think partly we need to help patients be informed. My world of intensive care is pretty awful. Being on intensive care is really ugly. And if you survive it, your life is never going to be the same again. And it's unlikely to be anywhere near as good as it was before. And a lot of what we see is completely preventable. But we can't just inform people. We have to change the policy, as we'd heard earlier on. Because taking your daughter's case in point, if she were unfortunate enough to get breast cancer, of course she would want the surgery and the chemo and so forth. But if we had policies in Britain that allowed her to cycle for the same amount distance as an average woman in Copenhagen does, which is about 1.3 miles a day, that would reduce her risk of breast cancer by nearly 20%.
And it's not a lot, is it, 1.3 miles?
It really isn't very much. And that's a 20% fall in her chance of getting the disease in the first place. We were talking earlier on too, there was a large trial published last year looking at quadriceps muscle exercises. Sounds very boring, and actually they are. But 68% of patients who were waiting for knee replacements who entered into that program volunteered to take themselves off the surgical list for a knee replacement, because their pain was so much better they felt they no longer needed it. So there are things we can start doing. If patients were empowered with those sorts of data, they might well say, well, do you know what, I think I'd rather do that than have the operation. And I'd actually would be campaigning to be allowed to cycle because I don't want to get breast cancer.
And that's back to the old thing, isn't it, of informed decision-making, people having the information, being able to make the choice. But I think that in the future that we're going into, technology's got a big role to play in that, in helping us to be better informed and understand some of this data and statistics, and more importantly, understand not just generically what makes a difference, so the 1.2 miles or whatever, but actually what makes a difference for me, and what do I need to do? And I'm assuming there's a massive role of technology
and
there.
actually as an unlikely contender that perhaps gets a bad rap, I myself also think there's so much misinformation on social media. But let's be honest, it is a very, very quick conduit and mechanism way of which a lot of people, not just the young demographic, I mean, I'm 42, a lot of my buddies are 45 and above. Most people at some point will have an alert, whether it's from Facebook or Twitter or TikTok or Instagram, and where we can make sure that the source is a credible, informed person. That's the danger, is there are a couple of mavericks out there who will spout all manner of trendy healthcare advice that is absolutely terrifying. But equally, there is a movement. I'm seeing this unfold firsthand, and did a report on this recently for a massive company, that actually social media can equally empower folks that previously wouldn't be able to make sense of complex medical treatments of conditions. I know a number of people who have looked at these platforms, just searching that particular keyword, and you've got to have some sense of discretion to get a sense of the person that's giving you this advice, or is this person actually informed? And you can actually fact check that quite easily. But to be able to look to that as an awareness tool where previously we might have thought, I mean, how many of us are actually accessing a neuroscience journal or a medical journal, those of us that aren't in the field, not as many. So using that as a tool to demystify is great. But the other thing is also there are also now a lot of apps to help with our cognitive abilities, to help with our mental well-being, looking at even cortisol and stress spikes as being the precursor to so many illnesses and diseases. And so these interventions that hopefully preempt it and perhaps even act as a way to give us some of that storytelling around, the example you gave, for instance, I wasn't aware of that. Just that small amount of movement or exercise a day can reduce that proclivity for something as serious as breast cancer. And until, unfortunately, we're afflicted by something, we're not necessarily looking into it in that depth. So I do think that a lot of innovation and technology is democratizing access to that knowledge, so you feel a little more like you can take a bit more charge of your personal health.
I think many of the incentives in a number of healthcare systems across the world are towards activity and towards intervention. And unless and until those are changed, one of the key factors is going to be patient empowerment, which requires patient information. You've got to be informed to be empowered. And I'm wondering if you, Ariana, are seeing any changes as you look across the landscape in your view of healthcare, whether you see that balance changing, whether you see patients having a bigger voice, becoming more empowered in this area.
I would say so, yes. And I think coming back to the prevention aspect, I think that's where insurance play a big role, because insurance have to reimburse for care, and so they have a really invested interest in preventing disease. So we identify like insurance companies as our allies to prevent really the necessity of healthcare delivery or have interventions. And for patients, I was in a forum for kidney care a couple of weeks ago, and there was patients, hemodialysis patients, that would say, I have eco-anxiety, I feel very bad because each time I have my dialysis at home, I see how much plastics, the packaging, the liters of water that I use for my dialysis. So I think patients, they can see the impact of the sector. Of course, they care about safety. Of course, they want to have the best treatment, and I think they shouldn't feel guilty because they're getting a treatment. I think it should be the system ensuring them that the treatment is not polluting and is not creating emissions. So I think it's again, collaboration and have everybody informed. We heard before about the excessive care. There are data out there that shows sometimes 30% of the diagnostic are not necessary. And maybe it's patient-driven, maybe you want to do an extra check, but I think, again, it's dialogue. Patients care about what the doctor says. Doctors are like trusted voices. So again, having the time to talk and inform would help preventing this unnecessary care.
Yeah, I think there's some really good points there, Ariana. I think the relationship between the payer and the provider, how that works, how the incentives are aligned to preventive care, but also, again, the voice of the patient being accepted by the doctor. Hugh.
Yeah, I was just going to put in one other point, of course, because we're in a privileged position here by nature of our jobs, of our salaries and so forth, but we've got to remember that 16% of adults in Britain are illiterate. So they can't read anything, whether it's online or printed. And if you're poor, you don't have the choices about the healthy options that some of us in this room are lucky enough to have. And if I was a single mother of 3 kids, I would buy the cheapest ultra-processed food I could to make sure there was food on the table. So many of us, I think, have to vote with our money to try to make the healthier things more profitable. But we also have to use our political connections to change the systematic nature of society, because those people otherwise will be left behind. They won't be able to cycle, they won't be able to eat the healthy food, and we're going to leave them behind when the rest of us who can afford it and wear our wearables and are looking at our nice apps will move ahead. And those disparities should be narrowing, not widening.
Another important point, because I think what that does is it places healthcare in the context of the society, and you can't extract it. So the environment in which you live, which is all part of that, what's available to you, what you can afford, what you can do, what you can't do, which really does influence, as we've known for many years, the social impacts on health, influences what you're likely to get and what you're likely to be sick from. And so it's a much bigger issue in the context of the environment. So there's an advocacy aspect here for us as well, I think. a couple more questions, which I'd like you all to have a go at, if that's okay. We talked a lot about the challenges and the issues, the urgency, the importance of action. I'd like you to use your crystal ball and look forward and say, so where do you think we're going to be in healthcare? Where do you think we are going to be? Where would you like us to be in terms of healthcare, environment, impact, delivery, prevention, and so on, maybe 10 years into the future? I'll start with you, Aaron.
Okay. What I would like us to be is, well, what we see a lot in terms of solutions is that there are a lot of solutions that try to continue the business as usual and just to put, a patch on the whole. And so I think what I like to see is really eco-disruptive solution where the way how we're doing things is changed. And so, for instance, when it comes to healthcare, we have a lot of members that want to improve the sustainability performance, they want to do better, and they say, oh, we're going to recycle more. And so we need to say, well, recycling is not the thing that is going to solve the issues. We cannot recycle the way out of it. And so there is a tendency in general for businesses or healthcare professionals, or also for ourselves, when we want to do things better, to find the easy way out of it without really transforming the way we're doing things. And so the way I would like to see the sector going is really having the transformational change that is needed to reduce the emissions in time.
Fantastic.
On time, yeah.
Thank you.
We're in the midst of a fourth industrial revolution. Unlike anything we've seen, I do think that the future is a little more hopeful than we might think, in that a lot of sustainable innovation solutions are actually tackling these specific issues of the burden on the planet, equally wanting to enrich quality of life for people, because that's the language that appeals to people the most, to then take action. How will it affect me and my family and my loved ones? Oh gosh, that's going to make a difference. Then I will make a move. The other thing I'd love to see is the startup ecosystem be embraced even further by companies, quite in the way the eco-disruptive initiative is doing today. I've been privy to be a mentor to a number of incubator programs, and I see this sort of happy marriage between the agility of a startup that doesn't need to always wait for 100 proof points, or that buy-in from 3 layers of funding in an organization, which, let's face it, that's just the reality, the bureaucracy, and that's not always a bad thing. Together with the actual long-term knowledge and the resources and the trust, the public trust, and let's face it also, the connections with the government and regulation to actually enable some of this to happen from a larger organization. So seeing that happy marriage even further, I think will lead us to find solutions to problems that are already really permeating into our environmental culture, but equally to turn wasteful activities into non-wasteful ones with things like the circular economy.
And you see startups as being really important, having an important role in this, Shivi?
Absolutely. I think that the lifeblood of the digital economy, and now a startup can be early stage, or in fact, some of the companies that we know of are still considered a medium stage startup because they haven't necessarily had a particular turnover, or depends on where they are in that life cycle. But I think some of the ones that actually focus on environmental footprint, and there's some phenomenal examples today. I mean, I'm blown away by this, and I'm not easily impressed, let me tell you that. So no one's paid me to say this. They're looking very meaningfully at very specific measures, working back from that and blueprinting it. So it's very targeted. It isn't this sort of willy-nilly, let me just create something that's feel good and makes good PR, but actually how can this have an impact on more sustainable infrastructure? How can we use blockchain to verify the authenticity and safety of our medication? How can we create this app that means a patient that normally would be much, much further away from a large hospital, and the stats are that 60% of the time, patients who are further away from a large hospital or clinic have much worse health outcomes. How can we bridge that gap and use digital as a positive enabler to bridge that gap between the patient and the care that they deserve?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Matt, your crystal ball.
My
please.
crystal ball, I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen in 10 years' time. What I would like to see, I would like to see innovations that have been successful, that they're encouraged. So there's, for it to be something that people can think, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to develop. I want to get more and more problem solving to a specific problem. You know, we have a string of things waiting in our R&D list where we're just made that particular way that we like to see a problem and try and get around it. I think incentives is something that would be really helpful. So whether that comes, when we were just talking earlier, sort of on a wider basis, so when you start to think about society, government, all those things, whether we'll start to, in 10 years' time, have a different structure that incentivizes companies to look at their carbon footprint, to say, actually, you have to do this, you have to, by law or whatever, you know, you have to do this. And then it moves up the scale. It's something that C-suite sit there and have to really concentrate on and really know that they're doing the best they can. I think that's what I can hope for. That would be my hope and prayer. And I think sorry, just very quickly as well, a generation. So I really see that the next generation, from my generation, are so keen to get going with this, and we should be encouraging them to take the reins and really push it on.
Thank you. And Hugh, with the crisis situation, survival situation we're in, I'm interested in your thoughts.
Well, I was reflecting on it as others were answering. We're in a sort of quantum moment, aren't we? There are two futures that are existing at the same time, and we, like Schrödinger's cat, we determine which the outcome is by our actions now. Without action, you'll be facing the barrel of your children dying in 10 years' time. Society will be collapsing. It already is beginning to collapse now, if you haven't noticed, if you look around the world at food supplies, mass migration, civil dissent, lack of resources, sea level rise, etc., etc. 10 years' time, it'll be catastrophic, and there will be absolutely nothing that can be done at that point. If everyone decides today, right now, this very second, to change their own scope 1, 2, and 3, that's the power they buy, everything they procure, and what they procure to happen, and they do that in their personal lives and their businesses, then the outcome will be very, very different. Because we know we're at that nexal point at the moment. We've got 4 or 5 years in which to have cracked this 50% reduction in that 4 to 5 years. Achieve it, the future's going to be pretty good. Don't achieve it, it's going to be absolutely catastrophic, but the decision has to be made today.
Thank you. Sobering. Last question. We have a very diverse audience, both here with us today, but people who will be watching us, as I think these sessions will be recorded. So a real opportunity, as you, with your levels of expertise and information, a call to action. So I'd like you to be as specific as you possibly can, both with what you think needs to be done and who needs to be doing it, whether it's government, whether it's society generally, individuals, whatever. But yeah, so a call to action. What would you say? This absolutely is something that needs to be done. I'm going to go down the line again and start again with you, Ariana.
A call for action. I think it would be to really have the policy for a toxic-free environment. Okay. We heard a lot about packaging and the exposure to these microplastics and chemicals. And we know also about the connection with microplastics and climate change and antimicrobial resistance. So a call for action would be really to decarbonize and detoxify our environment.
So for governments, for legislation?
But also for governments to have the legislation in place, but also for businesses, because we need the businesses to come up with solutions. Okay. And the solutions should not, maybe replace plastics with other single-use things that are coated in plastics, what we were saying before. So real solutions that allow to decarbonize and detoxify the healthcare sector, but our environment in general.
Thank you.
Mine would be for organizations, so rally organizations to adopt what I'd like to call an inventor mindset, to think about bringing in the ingenuity within their organizations or collaborate with ones that have it externally, which we're seeing today as well, to be able to make sure we mitigate some of these very, very serious risks. I second what you said, that actually as much as I am a forecaster, I look deeply into what's unfolding now, and we needed to do a lot of these things yesterday. It's that urgent. But to be able to then be less risk-averse as organizations that have a big footprint, and they have I think the biggest scope to create a difference, to digital experimentation as a way to do that in a way that's more affordable, that's quicker, and that's a much less burden on fossil fuels in the environment.
Thank you. Matt?
So I think for me, it's that we stop sort of just saying sustainability is something that we have there that's almost like an add-on. I would like to see it moved right up the agenda. It's primary. If as Hugh's so eloquently put across, if we don't do this today, now, there's no point. It's all going to implode. So we have to have change. You know, people have got to get it, that sustainability is really, really important. It has to move to the top. That would be my call.
Thank you. And Hugh?
Well, it starts with us and it starts with business. So much as I'd love politicians to lead, they're not going to. So we can park that one. They'll move into the permissive space business and the public create for them, but they're not going to lead us. Yeah. The businesses are going to be the people that change things. Yeah. So we have individual responsibility as purchasers to decide with whom we work. And I'm here with Bupa today in an unpaid capacity because I kicked your tires really hard. You remember. And you're doing the right things for the right reasons. You're really serious about it.
He checked us out very thoroughly before he agreed to speak.
It was a bit brutal. But you're doing the right things, and you have to decide who you're going to align with and what you buy. So we can all reduce our carbon footprints. We can all go to a carbon calculator, and we can make substantial changes. Remember, we've got to be dropping at a huge rate. But that changes your market because it means that you now have customers. The second point I'd pick up is what we were hearing there, is collaborate. Because businesses should compete on quality of product and service. Of course they should. But they should not compete on being green. And if they all get together and say, we're changing our procurement contracts, we will not buy from any company for that plastic or that chemical or that product or service that does not commit to a 50% decarbonisation in 5 years. If you all do that together, the entire ecosystem changes all at once. Yeah. So that's the thing I would say is all of you, take your personal actions today, but do the networking today and find out who you can gang up with. If Bupa are going to be the hub for that, talk to Bupa. Get together and change that scope 1, 2, and 3. And then everything's going to be much, much rosier for us all.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I think everyone would agree it's been a really interesting conversation. A bit scary, to be honest, but I think we ought to be scared. So I think that's appropriate. Thank you very much for your time and your contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you.